All right, folks, welcome in. I'm Hennis Bolcom, joined by Brian on my team. Brian, thanks for joining me.
Of course.
Brian, so the point of this one is to have a great webinar where after you've already had a conversation with a future client customer and you say, hey, here's the designers we want you to talk to, they know what to do, what to ask them, how to vet them out so they know they're making the right decision on how to choose a designer and
Absolutely.
how important that is for their project. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Okay, well, let's get right into it.
It's probably one of the questions that comes up, the most on my first phone call, and it's a great jumping off point for starting a project. So
perfect, because we kind of use these words interchangeably, right? Design and designer, and unfortunately, there's different meanings, right? Because we can't necessarily say architect every time, and we'll kind of get to that. So why don't you start off? What's the difference between building design and interior design?
yeah, so building design is going to be the first step that you're going to have to kind of get yourself into in planning to build a project, whether it's a new home, an addition, or an ADU. And that comes down to, a lot of different things dealing with structural, Title 24, and you'll see some of those things on the next slide, Hinish. So like a feasibility study to make sure that it's actually feasible to build in the space that you have. Site surveys to make sure that your lot lines are correct and easements, that you're not going to encroach into spaces that you cannot build. Title 24, which is basically, a California standard and regulation on making sure your project is eco-friendly, cost effective, and also energy efficient. And that's just something that you have to, get approved through the state of California if you're going to build anything, as well as structural engineering. Make sure that we can build or put a foundation down somewhere that's going to, hold up your structure. And then they put together the plans and the elevations necessary to submit for the permitting process to the city or county.
Yep. And so when people contact us and say, hey, can't you just build me a box and put a kitchen and a bathroom in it? What's the response there?
Yeah, in California, there's a lot of red tape and there's a lot of hoops you kind of have to jump through. And this is, like I said, going to be the starting point. We want to make sure that everything's built up to code and that we're going to do everything right the first time, and that your building lasts you a long, long time.
Yep. And there's a lot of benefits to doing it with plans and with permits. One is that it's going to help your resale in the future if you ever sell the property.
Absolutely.
Right. Two, it's going to get built right because you're going to have a city inspector that's going to come through and check it every single milestone to make sure that it was done right. And three, proper building design can improve the efficiency of the construction and also the desirability of the property, whether you're going to rent it or you want to live in it yourself, making sure that you don't miss any details, right?
Absolutely.
If you're not a professional designer or architect yourself, then you're going to miss a lot of the details, thinking what you know in a house versus a professional that does this 60, 80 hours a week.
Right. Well, yeah, especially little things, even like how are you going to run plumbing and drainage and electricity? And do you have enough electricity ampage in your current electric panel, or does that need to be upgraded? There are a lot of things that, it's a lot harder than just pulling out of grid paper and sketching a house for yourself. There's a lot of moving parts that are involved, and you want to make sure that you cover all your bases. So the light switches work when you turn them on.
Yep. And we see that often, right? People be like, oh, I drew up something in SketchUp. Can you build off of this? I'm like, how big is this wood? How big are these windows?
Right.
What kind of
is this structurally sound? Yeah.
Where's the mechanicals in this thing? And they're like, oh, can't you just figure that out? No, we can't just figure that out. Someone's got to tell us. That's an engineer, most likely, because we're construction people. We're construction people. We can build it and we know how to, but we need someone to sign off on it. And that's why you get the plans done. That's why you get them permitted.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So now getting into, we give you a list of designers and say, hey, based on what we've learned about you, here are a few that we think will be a good fit, because we work with several, fortunately, right? We work with several designers, draftsmen, and architects. And so go into it, Brian. What are some of the questions we should be asking?
So yeah, and this is like I said, when I have a discovery call with a potential client, I mentioned to them kind of what the process looks like. The first thing you're going to need to do is find an architect or a design firm to help you put these plans together. But it's always like, well, how do I know which designer I want to work with? And so that's kind of the purpose of this webinar, is to try to inform, the general public or anyone who's looking into building an ADU or a structure, just some questions you should be asking. Just because we refer them to you doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a great fit for you, or that you're necessarily going to be a great fit for them. And so by asking some of these questions, you eliminate wasting time with a potential bad fit right off the bat without having to do a site visit with them or go too far down the process. So we've put together 6 different questions on, what we think are important questions to ask to start vetting some of these companies out. And one of them are, maybe the number one to ask is, how many projects have you done? What's your experience with similar projects for what I'm looking to build? And that's an important question because you want to find someone that has experience that can deliver an end product in design that you're looking for, right?
And the style as well, right? There's lots of different styles of architecture, so you might vibe more with one style than another. And so if they have a website and portfolio, it's good to be able to review it and see what kind of properties are they building, and are they in their wheelhouse of what's similar to what you're doing, because everything has different considerations, right? I just had a client tell me that, hey, he couldn't use a regular ADU designer for his project because he's building a 10,000 square foot multi-unit, right? And he's like, maybe, he's like, I'd rather have someone that has more experience with that because there's a different nuance and different experience that comes along with building a building of that size versus building a 600 square foot ADU.
Absolutely.
Right. And so what else can you glean from someone's website or portfolio? And what are you looking for when you ask them for their experience?
Yeah, basically, like you said, do they have experience, or do you have a website and portfolio? And I've worked with designers that don't have a good online presence, and it deters potential clients of ours away from using them because they want to see, hey, show me some proof that you can build something and show me something that you're proud of. And so they're looking for things and looking for resources to help them identify whether or not it's a good fit. And that's a really easy way to kind of go in and start vetting out companies. I recommend that people do this every time I talk on the phone with them. Say, visit their website, look at some of their projects, see if it's something that you think, hey, that's what I'm going for. And then you can even bring that up when you have that conversation with them on the phone. Hey, I saw this, I really like this style. It's a really good place to start if you have an idea of, another project that they've done in the past will work for you.
Yeah, and that's important, right? Because some designers will reuse prior plans, say, hey, this looks almost like the plan that I already have. Let's just tweak this a little bit.
Yeah.
And in fact, some of them might cut you a break on their fees if they get to reuse an old plan.
Absolutely.
Okay, next ones. Okay, what else?
Designing a home versus designing an ADU. What are the differences? I think this is maybe not the most important question, but it might give you a little bit of insight into the experience that they have with ADUs in particular, or homes in particular. Really what it's going to come down to is, what is the purpose of your ADU, right? Are you using it for personal use? Are your in-laws moving into your backyard because they're getting older and need to be cared for? Or are you strictly using this as a rental property for income? And those two things and the way you might design them differently can affect the cost and the overall price on the building, because we're going to design something, or the designer is going to design something that's more rental friendly, and that is a little bit more turnkey, doesn't have to have like the best and most expensive materials in it. This is really just to look nice and have some longevity to give you some residual income.
Okay, it makes sense. And then what about the budget here for the designer?
Budgeting with the designer. Yeah. And so that's one thing that I always tell, anyone who's calling in. I refer out a design firm, they give them a call, and I say, hey, I'm going to continue to follow up with you, because when you sign a contract or an agreement with a designer, we like to be involved as early on as the design phase to make sure that these designers aren't building something that's outside of the budget that we've initially talked about on our discovery call, which is important because, it's a silly story, but one client that I'm working with, her architect designed an underground gym in her building plans, and said, oh, I put this in here so that you could have a personal trainer come to your home and train you. And she's like, I'm 62 years old. I don't work out. I don't need an underground gym in my home. So just like making sure that we're involved and staying in touch with the designers and working with them from an early stage so that we know that they're designing something with you that's going to stay within your budget on the building costs.
Yep. And so, along with the budget, it can vary quite a bit, right? I've seen draftsmen charge as little as $5,000 to $6,000 for some basic plans for something. Or maybe if it's just a remodel and you just need to move walls, right? You still need to get a draftsman or a designer, draw those up and submit them for the city, because it might still need structural approval. And anytime we're moving electrical or walls, we need permits even for a remodel. So that's important to have, and commensurate with that, the cost of the design changes, right? So for example, I mentioned that 10,000 square foot project that we'll be doing soon in Point Loma. That'll be about a $2 million build cost, right, to build this structure. Meanwhile, they're paying $100,000 for the architect for the plans.
Right.
Right. And so in that case, it's about 5%. And I found that it's kind of similar. If we're building a $200,000 ADU, the design plans could be roughly 10,000. Maybe it's 8, maybe it's 15,000, but roughly 10,000. So about 5% of your total construction budget seems to be going towards the design.
I would say, yeah, that's probably a pretty good general rule of thumb if you're trying to look at what your costs associated with planning might be.
Yeah. So, and it's worthwhile to spend that because, you know, a lot of good designers and architects can design in a way that's efficient, right? It's called value engineering, where they're designing the framing and the layout and the structure in a way that'll be cheaper to build, but still meets your goals of the design and the function that you want from your structure.
Absolutely.
So it's important to vet that out to make sure that the designer you choose knows how to value engineer and knows how to build according to a budget and knows roughly what it costs to construct what they're designing.
Right.
Okay. All right, next. What's next?
Very important question. What services do your fees include? And we kind of went over you know, the list of services or things that you might find in a design firm or an architect on the second slide. You know, reiterating like Title 24, structural engineering, a site survey. You may need a soils test to make sure that the soil on your property is sound enough to build on, or we may have to pack it down and make it, you know, make it more structurally sound, even to put foundation on top of, right? So do your services and your fees align with what I need on my property, and what's included in your fees? Is a very important question, because when you're meeting with several different design firms or architects, you'll find that their pricing will vary. You'll say, well, why is his $16,000 and theirs is $11,000? Well, the $16,000 person is including structural engineering, is including kind of the white glove handoff and pushing you through permitting. They're giving you kind of a one-stop shop, which will save you time and save you the hassle of having to find a structural engineer yourself down the line. So those are just good questions to make sure that they're covering all your bases for you. You want to find someone that's going to kind of handhold you all the way through the process and get you through it as quickly as possible.
Yep. And so, you know, the converse question is also important, is like, what doesn't your fees include, right? What, you know, are there going to be any surprise things coming up? Like, is this include soils testing, or do we even need it? You know, how do we know that, right? Or do we need to do a historical preliminary review, things like that, that might cost extra, that they might tag you with later, that it'd be worthwhile for you to find out, what's this include? What do your fees include? What don't they include, right? And as you mentioned, Title 24 is a prime example, structural engineer is another prime example, because those could cost $2,000 to $4,000 each for each service. And so if it's included, great. If it's not, we'll just be aware that that's an additional cost, and what's that going to cost in the future, so you can compare apples to apples if you're looking at the financials of how much each designer costs.
Absolutely.
Okay, number 6.
What's your availability and turnaround time? You know, some people don't really have very strict timelines set for themselves and don't even know what they're getting into as far as what planning looks like, how long permitting is going to take, what's the build time going to take. You know, but a lot of people are very anxious to get started. They understand that there's a need for it in the market. So making sure you ask that question, like, you sound good, you sound like you might be someone I want to work with, you answered all my questions. What's your availability? How soon can you get this process started for me? You know, and there's two sides to every coin. That being, you know, you might not necessarily want to work with a designer that has immediate availability, because the good ones are typically booked out, sometimes for months. So if you can afford to wait that time, it may be worth your while to you know, save and set aside some time in the future when they do have availability to meet with someone that's a good fit for you. On the other side of it, you know, if you're looking to get this done as soon as possible, it's an important question, because you want to know, hey, can I get this started soon? How long is it going to take to get plans done?
Yep. And then, you know, on this slide itself, you know, another thing I was thinking about is, we're doing a house right now in Crown Point, and it would have been coastal, except we were able to direct them to an architect that knew how to avoid coastal with basically a new build of a property in the coastal areas, right? So it's effective mostly anywhere near the ocean in San Diego. So finding out if your specific project, they have experience in your area or with your jurisdiction as well, so they know how to get through any loopholes. with whatever city or neighborhood or coastal commission that you might have to get through as well.
Right.
Okay, let's move on. What's next? We're talking about interior design, right? Because we say design, but it could mean interior design as well. In this case, we've already covered what a building designer does. Now let's get into interior design. This is a nice little image you got here with all the trim and
It looks nice.
Okay, so same type of questions you're asking here for the interior designer, right? What do they do? What have they done? What kind of projects? And show me some pictures. Let me see what kind of style you have, because you could imagine that a designer with X style doesn't do Y as well, right? Because
Right.
it's not their preference. Maybe it's not what they like. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so I think one of the main purposes we wanted to put this presentation together is not only just how to vet, your design firm or you're an interior designer, but also, to identify the difference when we say design, because that's something that comes up on my phone call. So the first thing you're going to want to do is meet with a design firm, and the immediate reaction is typically, well, I'm not anywhere near interior design. Like, I don't know what I want yet. And so for us to just kind of educate the public and general consumer who's looking to build the differences between the two, right? But they are very similar in the sense that they're helping you design your space.
Yeah.
And so asking very similar questions that you would ask the design firms or architects, what is your experience? What kind of projects do you prefer to do? Maybe they prefer to do only new builds, or maybe they only like to do remodels. So it's important to kind of know, hey, what do you like to do? What's your experience? What space do you work in, to make sure that they're a good fit for you?
Yep.
And again, with the website and the portfolio, do you have something that I can look at past projects to see if it'll fit my style and what I'm looking for? And that's very important. And some people don't know. So it is good to kind of click through a portfolio or a website and get some ideas, even oh, wow, I like what you did at this space, or that looks like something that could work in my home. And that's kind of where you build off your idea board.
And Brian, I don't think we put this on the slides, but one thing that's important to me always is references and or testimonials, right? Hey, can you give me a few references of people you've worked with recently, or people, or testimonials that you've got as well? Because that would be helpful for me to see that you've worked with other people and they were happy with your process, because people could talk a good game up front. It might be a different story to work with them during the process. So if you could talk to a client that spent 20, 50, 100 hours plus with them working on revisions for both building design or interior design, because it takes a lot of versions of this to pick out your building and make sure the windows and doors and floor plan are exactly right. And then, eventually go to the interior designer, make sure that the floorboard matches the tile, which matches the light fixtures, which matches the poles and cabinet hardware that you need. Those are all tricky, and you're gonna have to make sure you get along with them. And so references can kind of vet that out, oh, they were the best, or no, they got difficult, or I couldn't find them. They were, when I got busy, they weren't available. You can find out that by checking with some references.
And you might even uncover a potentially really big red flag if they don't have references to send you, right?
Yeah.
Or they're not willing to share that information. So
yeah, but ideally we're only referring people that have been vetted at least by us somewhat.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's tough because even in our shoes, firms that were good with us last month might have changed because they've lost key staff, or they've got some turnover, or whatever it is. So things can change. So, we want to make sure we always refer 3 to let you know that you can ultimately choose anyone you want. But here's 3 that we've worked with that have been good with us in the past. No promise of future performance. Right. Okay. So, why would people want an interior designer, and then how do you know it's going to be in the budget?
So interior designers, in my opinion, there's a couple reasons, right? So one would be, like I said, not everybody knows what they want their house to look like or their ADU to look like. You may have a Pinterest board, or you may have seen some photos online, but bringing that all to light is a little different than just saying, hey, I want something that looks like this, build this for me. There's a lot of research and work that goes into finding materials with that look. Even if you have a couple pictures of a home that you love, matching the flooring, finding something that's going to look the same but also be cost effective, finding that material and finding out whether or where it's in stock, and do we have enough for the project. Just the database and the information that they have and the experience that they have from interior designing for so long provides a lot of different avenues into finding materials and actually putting your ideas into reality, without you having to spend 40, 60 hours trying to track down all this stuff by yourself.
Yep.
Not only that, but a lot of the interior designers that we work with have really good relationships with their suppliers or manufacturers, and sometimes they're able to pull some strings to get things shipped from a different location if need be, or even sometimes get discounts on materials because they're a repeat customer for the suppliers.
Right.
So
Absolutely. And then, with the design, it's not just picking out tiles and paint colors and flooring. It could also be the furniture that you
right.
put in as well, because you're getting a furnished place or you're moving into it yourself and you want it to look right. So then it comes down to space planning, making sure that you get the couch that's the right size for the room instead of too small or too big, and making sure you've
Yep.
got a table that fits there too. Because if you're not out there with the tape measure and checking and making sure there's big enough walkways, right, 36 to 42 inches or more, that you can get around your stuff. That's where key space planning comes in. And I've done a lot of projects myself, and I still hire a designer for my own personal projects as well, because they're better at it than I am.
Yeah.
They're way
Well, and it
better.
helps. It helps on the construction side as well, because some people, like I said, don't necessarily know what they want. And when we get to certain phases in the construction, we have deadlines that our clients need to meet in order to select material. And if you can't make up your mind, or if I've seen husbands and wife go at it, no, I want the white floor, or I want the gray floor. Having that middle person or that mediator help make decisions and move the process along can essentially move your building process along a lot quicker if we can make those decisions in a timely fashion.
And yeah, and it'll save a lot of time for the homeowner, right?
Absolutely.
Some designers will say it'll save 20 to 30 hours per room or more, right? A complicated room like a kitchen takes forever to make everything match and fit and work out. And so they can bring supplies and samples to our showroom, to their house, and say, here's a few options that I think would work best based on what you told me and what I can find and in your budget. Let's put the board together this way in terms of your design board and what that looks like. So I've gone through this experience myself several times, and it's always a blessing to have a designer, because I wouldn't know where to start. And it's nice because they know which companies have stuff that's in my price point.
X, Y, and Z. Exactly.
Okay, next. What's next?
Who is liable if something goes wrong? If, like, for example, if the wrong material was ordered, or if it's the wrong color, this isn't what we agreed upon. This is just a good question to ask, because you want to make sure that if they're dedicated to selecting and helping you find the correct materials, that they're also willing to take responsibility or ownership if a mistake does happen on their end and fix it. Because if they're like, well, sorry, that's what came, but it's not really what you wanted, you want to make sure that you have someone that's willing to work with you to get the end product that you desire.
No, and that's that just comes down to accountability, right? If you're doing your job and you measure a vanity that's too big for the bathroom, and that's what gets ordered, and it shows up, and you're like, I can't open or close the door here. Well, we're not redoing the door.
Right.
You're gonna have to get us a new vanity.
Right.
Right. So yeah, and it's a good question to ask, because this is maybe something you ask a reference. Hey, did everything go perfect? If not, what went wrong, and how was that resolved?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Okay, what services do your fees include? So what's the variety of services that an interior designer can offer?
So I think that, every interior designer that I've kind of talked to and worked with clients on and with, their services are all fairly similar, right? They're trying to help you track down materials and design a space that's going to work based on your design plans. One thing that I've realized kind of having this conversation with interior designers is it's, along with this, asking not only what services do your fees include, but what do your fees and how does your invoicing work? Do you charge by the hour? Do you charge by the project? There are different packages that I've seen. So finding out the way that they bill is also going to be really important. And that will help you actually find out whether or not it's within your budget or not. And
Yep.
don't be scared to have that conversation first time you talk to them, because that's just going to help you, like I said, vet this individual or this company right out the gate to make sure that you're working with someone that is going to bill and be realistic with you on what the payment's going to look like.
Yep. And I would argue that in addition to just building design finishes in terms of materials for the construction, they could also have that supplemental task of doing the furniture selection and
Right.
drapes and artwork and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then even going so far as to arrange the delivery and the placement and the unpacking of all that stuff too, right? Because that
Yeah.
takes a little bit of time. And even hanging your paintings and pictures on the walls, any other artwork throughout. So those are extra levels of service, but you can get a finished product. And if you've got the budget for that, And it makes a lot of sense to hire a designer who a lot of times is, it's not, they can do their job a lot more efficiently than you can do their job, right?
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
always tell people, I'm like, hey, they could probably do their job 4 times faster than you could do their job.
Yeah, and I'm not going to give myself a root canal. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right. So
it's
there's that.
just
And then also, you're probably better at your job, and it's better to do your job for an extra hour or two and hire the designer that can do their job so much faster than you can.
absolutely.
Okay, so this is another key thing that our designers tell us is, sometimes we meet clients that are just order givers. You're going to do this and do this and this and this and this, and that's how I want it. And I have to remind people that they're not at Burger King. It's, you don't just get it your way right away. We got to make sure it's the right fit. Not just for our construction company of whether we want to work with you, but also the designers too. These are people that have their own interests and their own backgrounds, and they get to choose who they want to work with. A lot of them are self-employed or work for a small company, or even if they work for a larger company, the people that make the decision of whether they want to take you on as a client, that's important too. So it's important to be a very good client as well. And you might be wanting to ask him, hey, what's a good client look like to you, right? What's a good working relationship between me as a client, hiring you as a designer, building designer, architect, whatever? How's an ideal relationship look?
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think that these questions that we're asking help, our potential clients figure out whether or not they're a good fit, for us, but also, whether when they're looking at design firms or interior designers, finding out whether they're a good fit for them. But, asking, hey, what does your, ideal customer look like? Or what are your expectations for me throughout this process, just to make sure that those are aligned? Because if they start saying things and you're like, well, I don't have the time to dedicate to that, I was kind of hoping you would take on more of that responsibility. Just making sure that you set some boundaries and some clear expectations with them early on the first phone call can make the whole process go a lot smoother if you run into those situations.
For sure. Yeah. And having someone that can outline what their process looks like is useful, right? Hey, we're going to start off with a 1 to 2 hour meeting to get an understanding. Then I'm going to come back with some preliminary information, and that's going to take a few hours. And here's what we're going to do after that, right? And no, you cannot call me at 9 p.m. on Sunday night.
Yeah.
There's things like that, and clients sometimes don't realize, right? Sometimes people think, oh, I've hired this person, I can call them and talk to them anytime they want, and they'll get back to me immediately. And just set expectations. Maybe some people do offer that type of service, and are available at 9 p.m. on Sunday nights for you, but other people don't, because they've got their own lives or kids or families to take care of.
Right.
So be considerate of that. If you don't want to be that nightmare client for that designer or architect that says, oh crap, I don't want this person calling again, I wish I never took them on as a client.
Right.
So be conscious of being a good client for the architects, and mindful that they're regular people too, with their own lives outside of their business.
Absolutely.
So Brian, that kind of wraps it up. Any last thoughts that you've got?
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything. And this, we put together this webinar because we held an event at our office, and a lot of people found it very useful. And I think it's just a good source of information on anyone who's trying to get started in a building process, and kind of what that looks like, and how to vet out and find the right company for you to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I appreciate you sharing. I think it's a good resource, because we have this whole stream of ADU webinars, right? In terms of how to build it, how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take. Here's how the design works now. In this one, we've got other ones that talk about the tax implications of building something on your property, whether it's additional square footage, a new house, or an ADU. So lots of good, useful information. So I implore people to follow our YouTube channel at the California Home Company and watch the other ADU webinars as well. That will be useful in your pre-planning phase for building something with us.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Ash.
Thanks for your time.
No problem.